The Oakridge Homeowners Association was notorious for its suffocating rules, but the latest mandate pushed the community past its breaking point. A new regulation required all residents to keep their garage doors open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., allegedly to prevent illegal storage and unauthorized rentals. The reality was far more insidious, a blatant display of control by the HOA president, Cynthia Marsh. Mark Evans, a 10-year resident and the town's chief of police, read the notice with growing disbelief. He turned to his wife, Emily, who stood at the kitchen counter, her brow furrowed in concern. "This is ridiculous," Mark muttered, gripping the paper. "They're asking us to invite crime into our homes." Emily sighed, setting down her coffee. "You know, Cynthia thrives on rules. She'll enforce this no matter how unreasonable it is." Mark glanced out the window at his garage. It wasn't just a storage space. It housed his police equipment, his son's prized dirt bike, and years of personal belongings. Leaving it open all day would be an open invitation for thieves. Ignoring the rule wasn't an option either. Within hours of the notice, HOA patrols began sweeping the neighborhood, issuing violation slips to those who refused to comply. By the third day, Mark found a bright yellow warning affixed to his door. Non-compliance notice. Immediate action required. "This is getting out of hand," he said, shaking his head. "They can't legally enforce this." Emily hesitated. "Mark, what if they escalate? They fine people for less." As if on cue, a commotion outside drew their attention. Greg Thompson, their next-door neighbor, was in a heated argument with an HOA representative. Greg, a carpenter who relied on his garage for work, had refused to comply. Now, a tow truck loomed his driveway, ready to seize his vehicle for unpaid fines. "You can't do this," Greg shouted. "This is my property." The HOA rep, a smug-looking man in a crisp polo shirt, merely shrugged. "You were warned, Mr. Thompson." Mark clenched his jaw. This wasn't about rules. It was about control, and he wasn't going to let Cynthia and her minions bully the neighborhood into submission. As the tow truck rumbled to life, Mark made a decision. He wouldn't just defy the rule, he would expose the HOA's abuse of power for what it truly was. Mark had spent his career upholding the law, but he had no patience for those who twisted it for their own gain. If the HOA wanted a fight, they had chosen the wrong opponent. The next morning, Mark left his garage door shut and waited. By noon, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside his house. Cynthia Marsh stepped out, flanked by two board members. Her perfectly pressed suit and steely expression made it clear this wasn't a social visit. "Mark," she began, her voice dripping with forced civility, "you've received multiple notices. You need to comply." Mark folded his arms, standing tall in his doorway. "Not happening." Cynthia's expression hardened. "Rules are rules. We can't make exceptions." "They're not rules. They're violations of homeowners' rights," Mark countered. "You're putting families at risk." One of the board members, a wiry man named Alan, scoffed. "If people have nothing to hide, why resist?" Mark narrowed his eyes. "Privacy isn't about hiding. It's about security. And you're endangering this entire community." Cynthia's lips curled into a smirk. "You're a police officer, aren't you? I'd think you'd respect authority." "I respect the law, not power-hungry bureaucrats." Her smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered. "Then you leave us no choice. We'll escalate penalties, starting today." She turned to Alan. "Fine him the maximum amount." Alan pulled out a clipboard. "That'll be $500 for the first violation." Mark took the citation without blinking. "Go ahead. Send more if you want." Cynthia's eyes narrowed, sensing his defiance. "You'll regret this, Mark." As she and her entourage walked away, Mark felt the weight of the neighborhood's eyes on him. Some peered cautiously from their windows. Others stood in their driveways, whispering. Cynthia ruled through intimidation, and fear had kept most people compliant. But Mark knew fear only had power if people let it control them. That evening, he called a few trusted contacts at City Hall, inquiring about HOA overreach cases. The more he dug, the clearer the pattern became: unlawful fines, selective enforcement, and a staggering amount of misappropriated funds hidden under vague community improvement initiatives. Armed with this information, Mark knocked on Greg Thompson's door. The man looked exhausted, but when he saw the determined gleam in Mark's eyes, he straightened. "I have a plan," Mark said, "and I need your help." By the next morning, whispers of resistance rippled through the neighborhood. Mark and Greg organized a meeting in Mark's backyard, inviting affected homeowners. One by one, they arrived, some hesitant, others angry. Mark laid out everything he'd uncovered, from the illegality of the garage rule to potential financial misconduct by the HOA board. "We can fight this," he told them, "but we need to do it together." A murmur spread through the crowd. Then a woman from the back, Linda, who had lived in Oakridge for 20 years, stepped forward. "What do we need to do?" Mark smiled grimly. "First, we document everything. Then we take this to the city and the media." A spark of hope ignited in their eyes. For the first time in years, the homeowners of Oakridge saw a chance to break free from the HOA's grip, and Mark was just getting started. The next few days were a whirlwind of action. Mark and his team collected testimonies from homeowners, gathering evidence of fraudulent fines and intimidation tactics. Greg, being a skilled carpenter, helped make wooden signs that read, "HOA corruption ends here and our homes, our rights." Soon, nearly every yard in the neighborhood had one planted firmly in the grass. At first, Cynthia ignored the protests, dismissing them as empty gestures. But when Mark's contact at the local news station expressed interest in the story, things took a drastic turn. A cease and desist letter arrived at Mark's doorstep, threatening legal action if the protests continued. Mark merely laughed as he handed it to Emily. "They're scared." That same day, Mark received a call from a city investigator. "We've been looking into Oakridge's HOA for a while," the man admitted. "Your evidence might be what we need to take action." Mark grinned. "Then let's take them down." The resistance against the HOA had gained momentum, and Cynthia Marsh knew it. As the media and city investigators closed in, panic set in among the HOA board. Mark and his neighbors had exposed years of corruption, turning public opinion against them. When city officials arrived at the HOA office, they found Mark waiting, wearing his police uniform. "We need to talk," he said, presenting a warrant for financial fraud. The board members paled as investigators seized documents. By sundown, Cynthia was in handcuffs. The community cheered, knowing their nightmare was over. Justice had prevailed, and Oakridge was finally free. The resistance against the HOA had gained unstoppable momentum. The once intimidated homeowners of Oakridge now stood together, their signs declaring their defiance against Cynthia Marsh's oppressive rule. The media had picked up the story, and the pressure on the HOA board was mounting. But it was nothing compared to what was coming next. Mark Evans stood outside the HOA office, dressed in his full police uniform. His badge gleamed under the afternoon sun as he adjusted a folder in his hand, filled with evidence of fraud, intimidation, and financial mismanagement. The city investigator, James Holloway, approached with determined stride. "We're ready," Holloway said. "We've got enough to shut this whole operation down." Mark nodded. "Let's go bring them in." Together, they pushed through the glass doors of the HOA's headquarters, where Cynthia Marsh and her board were gathered in their usual meeting. The moment Cynthia saw Mark, her expression hardened. "This is a private meeting," she snapped. "You can't just barge in here." Holloway held up an official warrant. "Actually, we can." The color drained from Cynthia's face as Mark placed a thick folder on the table, flipping it open to reveal documents, misappropriated funds, falsified violation notices, and a pattern of financial exploitation. "The city has been investigating your HOA's practices for months," Holloway stated. "This evidence confirms everything we suspected. You've been issuing illegal fines, misusing funds, and threatening homeowners to maintain control." One of the board members, Alan, swallowed hard. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. Mark leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. "No, Alan, this is fraud." The tension in the room thickened as two uniformed officers entered, their presence unmistakable. Cynthia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You can't do this. I run this community." "No," Mark said, locking eyes with her. "You exploited this community." The officer stepped forward, reading Cynthia her rights as they placed her in handcuffs. Gasps and murmurs echoed through the boardroom as one by one. The other complicit board members were escorted out. Outside, the gathered homeowners watched in stunned silence as Cynthia was led to a waiting patrol car. Then someone clapped. Another followed. Within moments, the entire crowd erupted into cheers. Linda, the elderly resident who had spoken up during the first meeting, wiped a tear from her eye. "It's over," she whispered. "It's finally over." Greg clapped Mark on the back. "You did it, Chief." Mark shook his head. "We did it." With the corrupt board dismantled, city officials took over, ensuring the HOA would be restructured under ethical leadership. The unfair garage rule was abolished, and the fraudulent fines were refunded to every homeowner who had suffered under Cynthia's reign. As Mark and Emily sat on their porch that evening, watching the sunset over their newly liberated neighborhood, Emily sighed in relief. "I never thought I'd see the day." Mark wrapped an arm around her. "Neither did I. But when people stand together, no tyrant, no matter how small, can keep them down." The fall of the Oakridge HOA sent ripples through the town, serving as a warning to other corrupt associations. Mark's stand had not only freed his neighborhood, but inspired countless others to fight back against unjust authority. Over the next few months, a new, fair HOA was elected, one that actually served the interests of the homeowners rather than exploiting them. The garage rule became a distant memory, and Oakridge slowly returned to being the peaceful, welcoming community it was meant to be. As for Cynthia Marsh, she faced legal consequences for her crimes, along with several of her board members. The once untouchable tyrant of Oakridge now had to answer for her actions in court, and for the first time in years, the residents of Oakridge could finally call their neighborhood home again.